So, plenty to talk about today with our guests, who are Nick Dakin, Labour MP for Scunthorpe, and Amjad Bashir, Conservative MEP for Yorkshire and the Humber. Hello to you both. Nick Dakin, I know your week will have been dominated by the news of 900 job losses at Tata Steel in Scunthorpe. The government's announced a package of £9 million designed to help steel workers. Is that enough?
Well, it's not enough. It's welcome, of course, and that's to help steel workers affected both in Scunthorpe and in Scotland. I understand that about 3 million of that will be to support steel workers with training and other things, and the other 6 million or so is for regeneration type activities. So this is not an instant fix. It's welcome. To government's terms, it's not a huge amount of money, but what we really need is action to make sure we've got a steel industry in the future, to make sure there's a steel industry in Scunthorpe for the future. So we need action on energy costs, we need action on business rates, we need action on Chinese dumping, we need action on procurement. Those are the things where we need action, and this government needs to act before it's too late.
Amjad Bashir, as an MEP who covers Scunthorpe, what are you doing to protect the future of our steel industry? Working
extremely hard. We're a government that created 2 million jobs in the last 5 years. We're a government that's committed to creating 2 more million jobs. We're a government that's committed to have jobs for everybody that wants a job. So it's sad to see that hard-working steel workers in Scunthorpe are losing their jobs, and we're working tirelessly to address that problem, to alleviate that problem, alleviate that industry and help the workers.
Amjad Bashir is a former UKIP MEP, now a Conservative MEP. I believe you probably agree with free markets. So how do you prevent the Chinese selling steel at whatever price they want to charge for it?
Well, the Chinese are a problem, but they're not the only problem. The problem is that there is too much steel. It's a question of supply and demand. There's too much steel, and that's affected the prices. The prices have come down drastically, and that's affected the jobs. We have to find ways of creating these very hard-working, skilled workers in the steel industry to retain their jobs and to sell steel by procurement.
Well, that's been the government's kind of stock response this week, Nick Dakin. Ultimately, they can do nothing about the global price of steel, and that wouldn't change whichever government was in power, would it?
They can do some actions very clearly, and if you look at the energy costs that for our steel industry are a third higher than the energy costs in Germany, so they could match what the Germans are doing. The cost of the business rates in the Scunthorpe business rates is about 15 million a year, compared with the larger site in the Netherlands at Muiden that Tata have, which is about 3 million a year. They could do something to level that playing field, and they could take action to stop Chinese dumping. They could do that by putting traceability things in place, by putting other controls in place, because this steel is there's about 300 million tons of steel a year overproduction coming from China, and that needs to be stopped, flooding the European market.
Yeah, it seems to be the situation, Amjad Bashir, that it's cheaper to produce steel in other countries than it is here, and many blame your government, the Chancellor George Osborne, for introducing the carbon floor price. Now, Tata Steel warned the government about that when the government did that.
Tim, I don't need lectures from Nick on this. Under their watch, more than half the jobs were lost in the steel industry. 16,000 people were made redundant. As I said earlier, it's a global problem. There is too much steel,
but
and that's affecting
the carbon
price.
floor price hasn't helped the British steel industry, has it?
Well, who introduced it? Who introduced it earlier? It was the Labour Party that were instrumental in reducing CO2 emissions and burdening our industry with these high energy prices. We have a deficit left over because of these people. We have to tackle that, and we have to tackle the issues around energy prices.
Why can't the government offer state aid to the steel industry, which has happened in Italy, France and Germany?
Tim, we've already put in £50 million to help the steel industry, and this week the business secretary is going across to Europe to ask again if we can get some of our own money back to help the people affected by the steel industry. And this coming week, I'm having a meeting with the commissioners concerned to try and see if we can get regional development funds towards helping the people affected by this closure.
There are claims that Yorkshire and the Humber will be the region that's hardest hit by cuts to tax credits. A charity representing single-parent families is highlighting figures revealing that 6 out of 10 children in Yorkshire and northern Lincolnshire live in households that receive tax credits. Bashir, what would you say to somebody like Nikki we saw in that film there, who's going to be £60 or £70 a week worse off? That's her food bill and the cost of transport to school. Where would she find the extra money from?
Well, I usually have a lot of respect for Gingerbread, who conducted this survey, but on this case I'm a bit critical, because there's no doubt that 8 out of 10 families, working families, are better off by the rules that we're introducing. And there's no doubt, as your first contributor said, you know, we want a nation of hard-working people paying low taxes and living less on welfare. And that's a debate we as a nation have to have.
Yeah, but what's bothering a lot of your fellow Conservative MPs at Westminster is that actually this is going to affect, you know, we're not talking about people who are feckless and scrounging off welfare. Working people are going to be worse off. That's why so many Tory MPs are opposed to these changes.
Yeah, these are very difficult decisions that we've had to make. We were left with a huge hole by the Labour Party. Last 5 years we managed to reduce the deficit by half. We're committed to reducing that to zero in the next 3 years and coming out with a surplus. So difficult decisions have to be made, and it's right. If 8 out of 10 families are better off, I think it's a good proposal that we've got.
The argument against tax credits is that they subsidise companies which pay low wages, because firms aren't incentivised to raise people's wages if they know the government's going to be topping up people's pay packets. That has to change, doesn't it?
Well, I've got some sympathy with that argument. However, you need to, if you are making changes, you need to do it in a way where people aren't penalised beforehand. I mean, there's no reason. The government's giving about £3.5 billion cash back to incorporation tax to companies who haven't asked for that cash back. So that, you know, the governments have choices, and what this government is choosing to do is to balance the books on the back of hard-working families like Nikki and Jenny and other people up and down this land. It's not the right way to go about things. And frankly, it means the government says one thing and does another.
Tim,
exactly the same as with the steel industry.
If I may come back, is it right to penalise hard-working people and overtax them so you can pay others, subsidise others to be on low pay and get welfare? This has to end.
These aren't people,
our government has made the right decision.
Amjad.
Has made the right decision to get us out of this mess that you left us with, the Labour Party left us with, to bring about a nation that's the 5th most successful in the world to become even more successful.
So your cuts to tax credits would never have happened had the Liberal Democrats been in government. Not my words. Those are the words of the former Deputy Prime Minister Nick Clegg. In his first TV interview in his Sheffield Hallam constituency since the election, he told Len Tingle that EU leaders could also do more to prevent underpriced steel being dumped on European markets. Nick Dakin, he seems to suggest he went into government to do the best for the country and nobody thanked him for it. Do you feel a bit sorry for him?
Well, you know, he dealt with that question himself pretty well at the end there, didn't he? I mean, the reality is that he's exactly right when he says that the government has choices. It has choices on tax credits. It has choices on whether to act to save the steel industry. And, you know, I wish Nick Clegg was in government if he would make the right choices now. Unfortunately, he isn't able to do that.
I wish Nick Clegg was in government, but you never thought you'd ever utter those words, did you? Were the Liberal Democrats a moderating effect on the Conservatives? I mean, things like the child tax credit changes wouldn't have happened, would they, had the Lib Dems still been there?
Tim, I have a lot of respect for anybody who comes into politics to serve their country. But I think with that interview, Nick Clegg has lost all respect, muddled up thinking about steel, muddled up thinking about child tax credits and tax. This is why the voters out there, they've made the decision to vote them out of power, and they've only got 8 MPs left.
We're going to have to leave it there. Thank you both for your time today. To Nick Dakin and Amjad Bashir. With that, we shall go back to Andrew Neil in London.